Yeah, so I'm Jeremy, and I'm involved in the Jupyter frontend sub-project of Jupyter. And there is always a lot of going on there. So it's going to be very kind of unstructured, but so I have a set of tabs open of things that I thought could be nice to talk about and share with you. And they are going to be about developments in JupyterLab, Jupyter Notebook, but also in JupyterLite. So the first thing I wanted to share, it's very fresh, was published 2 days ago, is the new versions for JupyterLab and Jupyter Notebook. It's JupyterLab 4.4 and Notebook 7.4. And there is a blog post on the Jupyter blog, so you can read more about it here. There is even a walkthrough video at the end. And I can show a couple of the new features in JupyterLab. So one of the new features is the improved code consoles. So code consoles is like a notebook that is meant to be thrown away. It doesn't keep state in a file. And historically, you could only work with the code consoles in the prompt cell at the bottom, which was not super convenient because sometimes you wanted to do more, like move it maybe at the top of the screen. And with the new version, you can move that prompt cell to the top, move it back to the bottom, to the left, or even to the right. And there are a couple of more things you can do. So there are like a couple of buttons that were not there before. So it's easier to, for example, restart the kernel, or say if I execute a cell and then I can clear it more easily. There are a couple of other features also for the code consoles, but I will show them a bit later in the context of JupyterLite, so that we don't have to spend too much time now. There is something new also for the settings editor. So if you open the settings editor here, there are two buttons. So if you make some changes to, let's say, the code console, you check that box here. You can now export the file. And you see that the file has a JSON version of the settings, which is quite useful because then, let's say you start a fresh environment. So here we clicked on restore settings, so we just reverted our changes, but you want to add them back. So you can go there, import the setting. The UI is going to ask you to check the settings you want to import. And then the settings imported, and then we see here that we find the checkbox that we checked earlier. So it's more like if you want to save your settings somewhere on Git, or you want to share them with other people, you can do that a bit more easily. Okay, so in JupyterLab there is also a feature for working with workspaces. Historically, you had to go here and use this panel here to change workspaces. So workspace is more like your state of the UI. So if you have open like a terminal, a console, a notebook, and so on, if you refresh the page, you can find your state again. But some people were saying that it was difficult to switch between workspaces. So in the latest version, there is a new indicator here you can choose. So you can choose your workspace a bit more easily. Yeah. Can also remove it this way. Okay, so there is also some improvements to the RTC. So RTC is a real-time collaboration. Here I have Jupyter Collaboration installed, which gives me RTC features in the notebook. So here I have a panel where I can see if other collaborators are connected. And if I click on this link here, I include the token. So here I'm in a regular Chrome window, but if I open Incognito, and maybe I will make it a bit smaller here, I see that I'm connected to another one. I think I have another tab open somewhere else. But if I open this file, so it's untitled. Yeah, untitled as usual. I can type, and then the other person sees the changes. And the main difference in the latest version is the removal of the RTC prefix. So maybe it doesn't mean anything to you if you haven't used collaboration before, but in the previous versions, you used to see like something that says RTC there. That was more like for technical reasons, but now it's gone, and it should help like make the whole collaboration experience a bit more stable in Jupyter Lab. So that, because that was causing some issues with files not being saved properly or not being handled properly by extensions. So there's been some work to make that a bit nicer in Lab. There is also now support for kernel subshells. So in the Jupyter Notebook, if you run something that may take time to complete, the notebook is kind of stuck until that cell completes the execution. And now you can make use of the subshell, which is a new feature that needs to be added to the kernels so that it's usable in the UI. And it's been added to IPyKernel version 7, which is still in alpha currently. But if you install that version, you can create a new console here. And that means that if you start doing some compilation in the notebook, you can still run some other cells in the corresponding console without having the new cell blocked while something is happening. So I don't know if that will work, because I think I installed yeah. So here I have a subshell, maybe it's a bit too big. Yeah, so this one is doing some computation, very simple sleep, but here I can do execute some other cells while the other one is still running, and they are both using the same kernel. Yeah. So that's the subshell, but it's just an example of the use of the feature. There are other use cases like using it with IPyWidgets. So if you have like sliders on your UI and they trigger some computation, you don't want that computation to block, execution of other cells. So you can run that in a subshell instead. And there are other use cases, for example, getting the variable explorer to get all of your variables while you're still working on your notebook, so that doesn't have to block again. So it's more like a feature that still needs to have like extensions and also Jupyter Lab to integrate with. So yeah. Okay, so maybe a couple of other small UI tweaks. Like sometimes people complain about the fact that if you right click here, you get a context menu. So that sometimes you can't access the copy, from the browser, but you can actually do it if you hold the shift key and then you right click and then you get the browser context window. But now there is an actual toggle in the UI, so you don't need to. You can just right click. It's a small thing, but it can still be quite meaningful to some users. So I'm going to add it back. So yeah. Slimmer status bar is it's this icon here that's been a bit kind of made smaller, because before it used to show the terminal icon, but now it only shows it if we have a terminal running. So it's just to save a bit of space in the status bar, which can be a bit crowded if you have like many extensions running. Yeah. And then if I shut it down, it disappears. Yeah, so that's JupyterLab 4.4. If you are more of a new notebook users, you can also use Jupyter Notebook. And most of the features I showed just before, they are also available here. Not the status bar because the notebook doesn't have one, but yeah, others. So yeah, that's it for this new kind of release notes. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Otherwise, we can move on to some other updates next. Yeah. Yes.
What is necessary?
Yeah, it's mostly sharing the server, access to the server. Yeah. So here's on it's local host. So if you have access to that server from multiple people, then they should be able to see the same. So it was already possible before in a way, but it wasn't great because if you were starting to modify the same file, then you will run into conflicts because it was not handled properly. Yeah. So collaboration makes editing the same file at the same time work pretty much. Yes. For collaboration, you need the Jupyter collaboration package. Yeah. No, because it's handled by the Jupyter collaboration package, which sets up the provider so that the different peers can talk to each other and find each other. But yeah, I think you could imagine maybe different ways to enable collaboration. So we were also thinking about using WebRTC instead of having like a WebSocket handler in the server. So that that's also something that could be explored at some point. Yeah. Second. Yeah, it's yeah. Only if you expose it in some way, because otherwise the other computer is not going to be able to find your server. But like at this point, it's more of a deployment story. I would say that so if you host it somewhere that people can access, the server, then as long as they can all access the same server, they should be able to find themselves. But yeah, if you want to share something from your computer to the world, there are tools like that create tunnels to your local host. Like I think ngrok does something like this, and then you can share a URL. But then yeah, it's more like a deployment story, I would say, of Jupyter, and the possibilities are kind of endless depending on what you want to do with the setup. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, another project part of this front-end story is the Jupyter Lite project. So if you haven't heard about Jupyter Lite before, if you go to, I don't know, GitHub or search on search engine, and then you can click here. It spins up Jupyter directly in your browser very quickly, and you can create new notebooks and then execute some code. And there is no need to start a server or whatever because everything runs in the browser. So here the Python kernel is actually running in the browser via something called the WebAssembly. So it's really convenient, especially if you want to do something very quick, or if you don't want to deal with installing Python on machines, Windows, Linux, and so on, and have like a same set of dependencies for everyone. So that's Jupyter Lite. It's very close to Jupyter Lab and Jupyter Notebook in terms of the UI. It doesn't have all of the features because some of them require a server. But I wanted to show you maybe quickly a few things coming in the next version of Jupyter Lite. So the next one will be based on the Lab 4.4 and Notebook 7.4 we just looked at a few minutes ago. And yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you can. If here it's hosted on GitHub Pages, because in the end everything is just static files. So it's just HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and WebAssembly files. So if you go here and then I send you this, and I put it there, and it also loads. Yeah, it's the same website. Yeah, it's the same. You will see the same files, not the ones you won't see this one that I would just created because it's in my browser, but you should be able to see all of the others, and the packages that will be available there should be the same on my machine and yours. So GitHub Pages is like, for those who don't know, it's very popular for hosting static websites. So you just need one simple HTTP server to serve those files to users, and they are mostly used for like serving, I don't know, like blogs. For example, if you make your own blog with a static site generator, it outputs some files, and then you can host them on GitHub Pages. So Jupyter Lite makes use of GitHub Pages, but you can also, like for the demos, I mean. But you can also host it somewhere else if you want, like on GitLab or read the docs, anywhere where you can run a simple HTTP server. Yeah. So this new version is coming with a bunch of improvements. So there are limitations to what you can do in Jupyter Lite. And one of them was the use of the input function in Python. So it was not available in Jupyter Lite up until now. But in the next version, 0.6, now it's possible to do something like this. So the prompt, the cell stops when, there is the input prompt, and then I can continue executing the other cells, and it also works with, the getPass module. So if I write, hidden, and then it's here. Yeah. It doesn't look like much, but this input, in Python is like, so many people were asking for this because it's used a lot in, Python intro classes, like pretty much like the first line of Python you write is maybe this one here, like asking for your name, or you play this game of, like the number, and then it's bigger or it's like greater or less than the one that you're looking for, and they all make use of this input. And it was annoying because it was not really working in Jupyter Lite, and Jupyter Lite is used a lot for education purposes, so there was this kind of mismatch here. But now people will be happy because this will be working kind of as expected in the coming version. Yeah. So yeah, interactive input support, the new REPL options. So one thing that is quite powerful in Jupyter Lite is that you can create a REPL here. So it's just the code console we saw in Jupyter Lab before, but you can access it via URL. So here, if I have this and open it in another tab, then I get the same kind of thing. And you may have seen this if you go to numpy.org. They use it for letting people try NumPy directly in the browser, so they don't have to install anything. They can just try some code right here. Yeah, so it's very convenient. And the thing that is great about this is that you can encode some of the UI elements in the URL, like this. And those, they come from the changes in Jupyter that we were talking about. So yeah, so if I, for example, change here prompt cell position, instead of having left, I put right, and I share that, then the prompt cell will be on the right. Yeah, there are other places where this is used. For example, SymPy Live. They also use the same kind of widget there to let people try their libraries more easily. Yeah, and it's being adopted more and more in the Python scientific ecosystem because it's quite convenient for, especially for documentation. Okay, so another feature that was also quite requested was like knowing when there is something wrong going on with Python running in the browser, because Python running in the browser is not that old. I think it's a couple of years old, but it's still sometimes like can face some issues because there are things that are not supported. For example, here, like who would guess that this code snippet will make the kernel crash, right? Like probably no one. But actually, yeah, it does. So I'm just going to show you quickly something. So if you start a new notebook, you see there was this indicator here. So we kind of made some improvements to the Jupyter Lite so that it reports progress to the log console, which is available in lab by default. So if I restart the kernel, now I see a little bit more what is happening under the hood. Like in this case, it's PyDide, which loads a couple of packages before being able to execute code, and we can now see them here. So if we go back to this notebook here and I execute, now I see that actually when I run that cell, we have this kind of cross here, red icon, something is wrong. And it's a bit easier to know when there is an error, because here it clearly says like PyDide has suffered a fatal error. Please report this to the PyDide maintainers. Before you had to, do this kind of open DevTools thing in the browser that many people don't even know it exists. So especially people who are new to programming, working with Jupyter. So this is now a little bit more visible. And if you have the log console closed, normally if you restart and then run again, yeah, it will kind of flash here in the status bar. So it gives the user a better idea that there is something wrong going on. So small thing again, but since people were really asking for this kind of tools to be available, then it's also coming in the next version. Yeah, another thing in Jupyter Lite that is sometimes confusing is where are my notebooks stored, and also where are my settings stored? Because if I switch back to dark, let's say the dark theme, and I refresh the page, or even if I open a new tab, it's like it's keeping this dark theme. So people sometimes they ask, how can I go back and reset everything? Because the thing is, since everything is in the browser, the Jupyter Lite needs a place to store all this stuff. So if I create a new notebook, it's going to store them in the browser storage, but the settings is the same. They go in the browser storage. So if I go back here, now I can more easily clear this by going to help and then clear browser data. And I can also choose if I want to clear all of the settings, and also all the files. And if I check everything, and can go back to a kind of a blank state, which helps also fix some broken setup sometimes. Okay. Another common feedback was people saying that, okay, I don't know what is happening. It's a blank screen, it takes forever to load. So here, it doesn't take forever to load because fast internet and a fast computer. But if I slow it down on purpose, now we see that there is this kind of indicator that says that there is something happening, because before we had like really nothing, which was not great. So another small quality of life improvement, I would say. Yeah. Okay. So the settings import and export is also coming to Jupyter Lite because it's from Jupyter Lab. Plugin manager to be able to know, it's a bit more advanced topic here, know like what you have in your deployment. Improve multi-site content management. That means that if you host two Jupyter Lite websites under the same domain, typically under GitHub pages, they used to share the same notebooks because they were under the same domain. But now the URL, like the base URL, is also taken into account to better separate the two storages, because otherwise it was too confusing to users. So this is also a small improvement. And finally, multi-tab file system access. So there were some issues with like performing file operations when you were working multiple tabs. So this was also a bit improved, and there should be less bugs. Okay, so that's for Jupyter Lite 06 to be released very soon. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate. Otherwise, I will move on to... Okay. Yeah. Well, if you want to learn more, I think the Jupyter blog is also a good place. So if you search for Jupyter Lite, here's like the official announcement. It's already from 2021, so a couple of years old. But then you should be able to find other blog posts about like updates. There's one about like how you can embed your own code REPL on your website, how to customize your environments, and so on. So yeah, they should be easy to find. Yeah, so the previous demos, they were showcasing Pyodide, but there's been also some work on another Python kernel called Xus Python, and maybe one quick demo of the new cool thing that you can do now with Xus Python. So one of the limitations of Xus Python compared to Pyodide was being able to install packages on the fly. So before, like here, if I do import IPyNPL, which is for my matplotlib, and it was not available, I would have to kind of rebuild the whole website on my laptop and then publish it again, because it's like a new set of static files. But with the upcoming Jupyter Lab Xus version, now it should be possible to do something similar to the Pyodide kernel and do a pip install here, for example. And then if you import IPyNPL again, you have it this time. So less friction. Again, it's like small thing, but because people expect this kind of things to work if you come from like a regular Jupyter environment. But again, here we are, again, like everything in the browser. So things are a little bit different for sure. But the gap is closing progressively, hopefully. So yeah, and Jupyter is not all about Python. So maybe I can show you quickly again. So if you can subscribe, I think, to the Jupyter blog, and maybe you may be interested in this one if you are more into R. And here the announcement is like a new kernel based on Xus, so similar to Xus Python, but for R, the R language that runs in the browser, and it's also available here in this demo here. And that means running R in in your web browser in Jupyter. So yeah, and there are other languages coming, so stay tuned. Yeah. Okay, that's it for Jupyter 0.6 for all of these connected projects. And there was one thing actually I wanted to show. Like the other day, I was playing around with Notion. Do you know Notion? I guess, right, for taking notes. And I was wondering, like, actually, if you have like this REPL, like let's say you are not happy with the notebook interface, but you want to publish a static website on the web, you could actually write your thing here. You say, hello, Jupyter Open Studio Day. You just need to save it, and then view site. And then you can embed also, code REPLs there if you want. So I don't know, like it could be useful, like if you are not, if you don't even want to make your own Jupyter-Lite website, you can just use something like Notion and you put your URL to a REPL. So I can add another one, for example, here, like embed link. So it's kind of creating just an iframe right on the page. And then you just save. Can go back here. And it's instantly published. So it's quite powerful. Yeah. So I guess you can create some educational content like this. If you want to try. Okay. So continuing the Jupyter-Lite story, so it's not all about kernels, Python, and so on. There is also work happening to make a terminal work in the browser. And there is a demo here. So if you go to the GitHub repo, you can just click on this link here and opens this one. Once you are here, you see that the difference here that we have a terminal icon. If I go back to the regular deployment, there is none because the extension is not installed. But here I can open the terminal, can cat the files, and you can even run Lua, for example, here, because Lua is pre-installed as an example for this deployment. And even crazier, for people who like Vim, you can even run Vim in the terminal, in the browser, in Jupyter-Lite. So people complain sometimes because they don't have their favorite tools, but we're working on bringing them all in to the browser. So, yeah. And the cool thing is that it also syncs with the file browser here on the left. So here I just open Vim, save the file. Actually, yeah, if I open, it's empty. So the only requirement is to know how to exit Vim, of course. Otherwise, you won't be able to. Yeah. So the terminal, the use case is also for education. So there are a lot of intro courses for like learning how Bash works, like the ls commands and so on. So once we started to work on this, the folks that are, giving intro courses at universities, they were super excited because they were like, we spend so much time just setting up environments, and nothing works. Like we spend one day just to get it to work on people's computers. But now they can just pretty much just share a link to a deployment, and then they just need to, put their content there and then to their class. So we hope that's going to make their life easier also. Yeah. Okay. So we're reaching the end of the, long list of tabs here. Another interesting development that is happening in Jupyter-Lite is, of course, about AI. So there is already Jupyter AI available for Jupyter. So maybe I can show it quickly here, because when we were talking this morning, people also didn't know about it. even though we try to talk about that a bit more and more. So Jupyter AI is really what you would expect, like for now, mostly a chat panel on the left, and you can customize it to use the model you want. So here I just use Anthropic cloud model, and then you can, for example, ask it to generate some code for you. And there are some nice integration, like so if you have a notebook open, you can just inline the cells directly. So it's quite convenient. You can also select some code, I think, and then ask it to explain what this thing does. There is also, I think, let me see if I have enabled it or not. Yeah, normally there is code completion, but maybe okay, it's there. Yeah. So a little bit like Copilot style. But yeah, that's a Jupyter AI, and that works with Jupyter Lab and Jupyter Notebook, but requires a server. So we were wondering if we could have something similar, but that runs everything in the browser instead. So that would mean like making the calls directly to the providers from the browser. So that's why we started the work on Jupyter Lite AI. And again, the cool thing is, actually, you can even try it yourself right now if you want. It's on GitHub pages, jupyterlite.github.io/AI, and then it will bring you there. And if you open the settings, so the UI is a little bit different for now compared to Jupyter AI, but you can still choose a couple of providers. So here I've selected Mistral AI, put the API key, the model name, and here I also have the chat panel. I can say how to can pretty much interact with the provider also, but nothing here requires a server. Everything is in a browser. As long as you put your API key here in the box, it's going to make the calls directly to the providers. For now, we support, let's see. Yeah, we can see Anthropic. So I just tried this morning with the new Cloud 4, I think was released yesterday. And I think it works without having to update, which was quite nice. Yeah. So those are like models that run, that are, provided by these AI companies for sure. But again, Jupyter is also all about being able to extend as you want, not being locked in, like just OpenAI, Anthropic, whatever, Mistral. So there is also a way to add your own providers to Jupyter Lite AI via a Jupyter Lab extension. But the thing that is also quite exciting with everything happening in the browser is being able to actually run models in the browser. So you don't have to go and send requests to providers. There is a lot of discussions nowadays around privacy and like leaking data because of the context windows and so on. Like you don't really know like what they do with your data. And okay, I think I cleared my example notebook by mistake earlier, but it's fine. One thing that is quite exciting is on-device models. So Google has been working on the Gemini models, which are available via their APIs, but they are also now starting to ship some of these models in Chrome directly. So what that means is, so it's not going to be very complicated JavaScript, but they expose an API which is available in JavaScript, which is called nowadays language model. So it's still very experimental. Like I think a week ago, this was not like this, and it broke our integration because, you know, it's behind a flag in Chrome, and it's very experimental. So it may break tomorrow, but today we're lucky, so we can use it. So let's say the session prompt, what is 2 plus 2? And then you can get inference directly from your computer. So nothing leaves this computer. Everything happens locally in a browser. But the kind of the price to pay is a 20 gigabytes download upfront. And also enabling those flags. But we thought that it would be interesting to add it to Jupyter Lite AI because then it's just a matter, you know, of going to the repo, clicking on that link, choosing Chrome AI, and then you can just use it, right? So it's probably not as powerful as you know, the online providers, of course. So they haven't communicated that much about like how it works. Also, like I don't know if they give information on the context window, like also a bunch of other parameters for the Gemini Nano. But yeah, it's cool that it's there. So that's one use case for in-browser LLMs. Another one is integrating with libraries such as WebLLM. So WebLLM is a project that is looking into making some of the well-known models like Llama, Mistral, Qwen available to the browser, and they use WebGPU for faster inference. So we also added support for this. So here is if you specify your model here, and then demo effect. Okay. Let me see if we can try another one. Yeah. So the cool thing that is they actually provide a way to so that it downloads the model here. You can see the notification, and then it will be kept in a cache. So next time, if you reload the page, it will be much faster to load because it's already there. And now again, you have like, let me check if it works this time, I hope. Yeah, okay. I don't know what happened before. Maybe it was the model or I had something wrong. But yeah, now you can be on the plane and then work with the LLMs without internet connection because they are in your browser or on the train in a tunnel or something like this. So yeah, still, there are still a lot to do when it comes to integrating, you know, AI agentic frameworks also, so that they can perform more actions on your UI, like creating new cells, new notebooks. So it's already possible to create new notebooks in Jupyter AI, but we're going to add more and more of those integrations also in Jupyter Lite AI. So yeah, that's another development track. And finally, maybe a glimpse into the future also here is we have started to look into enabling both in-browser kernels with regular kernels in Jupyter Lab. So what that means is here is it's a normal Jupyter Lab. It's on my machine, localhost 8888. And you can see that I have two kernels, hyperkernel, which is the one that you get by default. But now also Pyodide, which is the one that I was showing earlier with Jupyter Lite. And one of them runs on the server and the other one runs in the browser. So the use case here is like sometimes in some companies or like in places where it takes time to start a new kernel, you may not want to wait too long to start doing some useful things. So if you open a Pyodide, for example, here, you can start and type some code while your kernel is running or it's starting up on your cluster, for instance. So we see that more like as a way to maybe start small in the browser, and then once you need more resources, you can default back to regular kernels with more resources. And lately I was experimenting with something like, so first of all, both have access to the files that are listed here, also from the in-browser kernel. But then I think it was a couple of months ago, the Meta team, so they also have like an internal notebook solution. I think it's called Bento. And they were on a podcast and they talk about they have a system that is kind of like this. So they have like a hybrid setup, and their users, they sometimes, well, actually most of the time, they start in the browser with Pyodide because they do some simpler tasks. But then they sometimes need more, resources or libraries that are not available in the browser because not everything is available in the browser. And they were talking about a system that they put in place to automatically move the in-browser kernel to a server kernel. And I was playing around with it the past few days. And so the UX is not there yet, but the idea would be if you try to import something like psutil, this is not available in Pyodide. Here, the extension that manages those kernels, detects that there is a module not found error. So you can imagine having some kind of configuration somewhere that says, okay, if I hit this error for that particular module or whatever, you can have like, for example, a mapping of modules you want to keep track of. You could choose to trigger this kind of kernel promotion. And if you click on promote, you see here that the kernel changed, and now it's a regular hyperkernel. And the dialog asks you if you want to just restart everything and run all. So we do this. And now the import works because now we are using a regular kernel on the server, which has the module available. So yeah, they haven't shared anything about their implementation, but this is more like of a experiment to try to replicate that, with open source Jupyter projects. I think that's it. It's probably already enough. So yeah. Questions?
Are you guys doing it?
Sometimes, yeah. Yeah, it's quite active, but we are also putting a lot of resources in a different distribution for everything, when it comes to packages in WebAssembly, which is based on the CondaForge model. So this is more where our time goes in the end, like making sure that the packages that people regularly use normally, they also work in WebAssembly and are available the same way that you will get Conda packages. And that is with the XUS Python. So that's kind of the short story of why we have both at the moment. So the approach is slightly different. So Pyodide started like as an experiment at Mozilla, and they just wanted to have like the Python scientific stack available in the browser. So that's why they put everything together. and they have like it's like a distribution with a fixed set of versions. So you can't really choose. Well, you can, but it requires a bit more work. Choose the version of the packages you want, with just distribution like Emscript and Forge, which is the Conda Forge equivalent for WebAssembly. You have more flexibility on that. So yeah, but sometimes there are maybe a few small PRs going to Pyodide, but yes.
Shiva, or Jupyter AI, Shiva to those like machines.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think it's the case, or maybe I missed it and there is a new option now. And if it's not the case already, I think it shouldn't be too complicated to do it. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Just the cell.
I think so. Yeah.
I was asking if the inline completions for the Jupyter AI had the context of the notebook. So I saw some of that goes next when you hit tab and accept what generate it. I was curious if it knew the context. Notebook or not. So it seems like it knows the context extension of the cell. We're saying maybe.
Yeah, I think it could be if it's not already there, but I don't think it is. Yeah. If you want to. Pair code. On the notebook? On the notebook? With the Jupyter collaboration, yeah, you could do this. Like the thing I think it was in the beginning. Yeah. Like if you want to share. Or you mean with an AI model? Without, yeah. Yeah, I think you could share the link to your server, but again, the server needs to be accessible by the other person. So if it's only on your machine, it's likely not going to be the case. Yeah, and then you could what's the name in this code? What is the name? The live share? Yeah. Well, this is kind of the equivalent. For VS Code, most likely Microsoft Server, yeah. Yeah. No, not yet. But yeah, I think it's going to be tricky. But I don't know. I guess it could be possible. Yeah, I don't know. Like if we need a way to serialize the state, or yeah, I'm not so sure about this yet. But there is also the idea that WebAssembly runs in a browser, but it can also run on the server. So if you have a kernel on the server that also runs via WebAssembly, is it possible maybe to, I don't know, like encode the state and then move it to the server in some way and then resume, like taking a snapshot, and then continuing there? Maybe, but I haven't tried if that works, but yeah, it may be at some point. Yeah. No, but the idea has been here for a very long time. I think the best shot would be based on WebRTC, I guess, or you could set up maybe your own service, run on the server, but then it defeats maybe the purpose of Jupyter-Lite. So we had an earlier demonstrator that I remember putting up like maybe a couple of years ago, but then the RTC stack got refactored quite a bit, so it didn't work anymore, and we haven't resumed that work yet, but it would definitely be useful for sure. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you can. So here I have where is my maybe it's hidden. I think it must be running already. I have Olama. Okay. You need to configure. So, see, yeah, I may need to restart the server. Yeah, so I installed, so Jupyter AI is based on LangChain. And if you want more providers, you need to check if there is a LangChain package for those providers. And in this case, it's called the LangChain Olama. What is it? Is it Olama LS, I guess? Yeah. So I could do this. Yeah, now it should, which model? I don't even know if Olama is running, but I think it is. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think you can, yeah, you can also run, like this. And then in Jupyter AI, there is also, this, AI. What is it called already? Load Ext AI. Yeah. So they provide magics, which is something that is common in Jupyter notebooks. So you can actually use those models via the AI magic as well. So here I've just said AI list, and they give me the list of models. You see. Yeah. It's the providers I can connect to, and if you want more providers, you will need to add more packages. Typically, the LangChain packages for the models you want to work with. Yeah, it should correspond to what I have in my environment. Yeah. But I think the best source of truth would be this place here, model providers. And you see that there is a list here. Yeah. And for each provider, they give you the package to install. The reader docs. Well, a search engine is always, you know, Jupyter AI docs, and then I end up on the Jupyter AI docs. Otherwise, yes, because usually the pattern is there is a GitHub repo, and the GitHub repo has its own documentation. And here the GitHub repo for Jupyter AI is this one. And the corresponding docs is on the reader docs because it's a common place to host docs for Python packages. But some people also host their docs on GitHub pages because it's just a static HTML and JavaScript. Jupyter AI is just another package. Yeah, you need to install it separately. Yeah, it is an extension. Yeah, it is an extension for JupyterLab and Jupyter Server, but it's bundled into one package.
Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Yep.
It is a bit past 3.